Welcome to the official Finovate podcast with Greg Palmer. In 2007, Finovate set out to create a dynamic fintech showcase featuring live 7-minute demos. For more than a decade, our global events series has brought together tens of thousands of people from across the fintech spectrum to see cutting-edge technologies. Now you can find out what goes on behind the scenes as key influencers and innovators share the stories that they don't get to tell you from stage. Here's a glimpse of what we have in store this episode.
Fintechs can start to alleviate some of these fears that financial institutions have for change or action by just doing their homework on who that financial institution is that they're about to talk to.
And now, your host, Greg Palmer.
Thanks for tuning in to the Finovate podcast. This is Greg Palmer. Today, we've got a really interesting episode for anybody who's coming from a fintech background. If you are trying to get in touch with community bankers and are looking at how you can effectively engage them, this is a really good episode for you. We'll be chatting with a real-life community banker who is passionate about digital transformation and has spent a lot of the last couple of years working on it in his own bank. We're going to pick his brain a little bit and find out what we can learn about how fintechs should engage that community. So let's jump right now into the interview with Corey. Joining me on the podcast today, we have Corey Leblanc, the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer at Origin Bank. Corey and I met at the American Bankers Association annual conference in Seattle, where we were on a panel talking about financial technology to a lot of bankers in the room. And I thought it would be a good idea to put the shoe on the other foot and have Corey come onto the show to talk a little bit about what fintechs need to know about working with community bankers. So Corey, welcome to the show. And to start us off, can you explain a little bit more about what you've been working on with Origin Bank?
Yeah. Hey, Greg, I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show. So, my job, let me explain that a little bit. I'm the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer for Origin Bank. And what my role is to find ways that we can use technology to create, efficiency and build amazing customer experiences that complement, our brand. So what that means is, over the past year, 2 years, I've actually been spending a ton of time working on potential strategic partnerships that can really help Origin Bank not only elevate our current offering, but also set us up to continue growing successfully in the market. And, we have some really cool things we've been building the foundation for that I'm excited to possibly start talking about here soon.
Yeah, I think that's great. I was really impressed by what I saw out of Origin Bank and what you guys have been able to do. I know it's been a long road that you guys have embarked on to get to where you are now, but it looks like you're in a good position and really able to tackle a lot of the challenges that are coming. So, at the ABA meeting, we talked a lot about how banks should be engaging with fintechs, especially smaller banks, community banks. And I think, there was a really interesting conversation there, but obviously it's not just banks who need to be better at engaging with fintechs. It's also fintechs who need to do a better job of engaging with this community banking community, which was a terrible phrase, and I apologize for saying it out loud. But the question I think is still a valid one. From your standpoint, what are the things that fintechs really should be aware of as they look to engage banks, and particularly community banks like yourself?
Yeah, we're just another customer, right? We're just like any other customer, but the needs of a financial services company. It's funny, we were talking a bit, I think this is a perfect question to be asked on a Finovate podcast, by the way, because, that whole 7-minute pitch format that you guys are using, I think is perfect for initial introductions. What's crazy for me is that, outside of the Finovate platform or outside of conferences, the format really isn't used that often. And it really works in an effective way to get buy-in from FIs or just any other industry, right? Because I think ultimately, as humans, we have this really short attention span that is decreasing every single day with the way that we digest information. And I think that when we're talking about, introductory calls or really engaging with a bank, we almost need to set like a 10-minute window to start. Maybe allocate 3 minutes for introductions, maybe another 7 minutes to, like you guys are doing, to detail how they're fixing a problem, why they exist in the market, why the problem aligns with my organization specifically, with my needs, with my customer base, and explain to me the path we need to take to kind of get there together. And if for those 10 minutes, you can actually align with who we are and where we're trying to go, I guarantee you we're going to give you that hour-long discussion to do that deep dive.
I think that's a really important piece here, because a lot of the fintechs that I talk to have a 30-second elevator pitch, which is very high level, frequently full of a lot of buzzwords. But if you're in the space, a lot of those elevator pitches start to sound pretty similar. It can be really difficult to differentiate a company based on that 30-second pitch. But to your point, an hour long right out of the gate is a large commitment, and it can be really difficult to sustain the interest level. I think the idea of kind of proving it first is a good one. So for fintechs listening, I think this is a really good challenge to make sure you've got kind of a medium length pitch. Like Corey was saying, an introduction, give yourself an opportunity to align with the company that you're presenting to, and then also give it a nice compact close. Leave the door open for a deeper dive later on, but start with something that's a little bit higher level. I think that's really good advice. And obviously that's what we've kind of structured Finovate to be. But outside of the conference standpoint as well, it sounds like that's just a really useful exercise to go through. So, one of the other pieces that we talked about, community banks have some unique challenges that I think the fintech industry doesn't always fully appreciate. We see big banks doing things, but community banks don't always have the same opportunities that some of those really mega banks do. What are some of the biggest challenges that you think smaller banks face in particular?
It's funny. I've been talking to a lot of people internally and also other financial institutions because we're discussing some of the huge stresses we're all kind of facing, right? We have these limited budgets to be able to accomplish a ton of things, and we have a very small forgivable window for failure, because of those limited budgets and also expectation. So we have to make some really smart choices, and we have to make them pretty fast. So what fintechs need to do is they need to be able to explain how they are the team of people that not only fits a need for a market, but also aligns with who we are as a company. For example, if we are truly trying to use your product for the improvement of our customers' financial lives, then you better be the company that has that same passion for people, that same mission that we do. And you need to be smarter than us in the areas where we're probably weak if you really want to get our business.
I love that. I think that's a great idea. And it's, people talk about partnerships versus vendor relationships. And I think that's, to some extent, it can be a semantic difference that we don't need to get into too much, but it really is a marriage, right? It has to be two people or two organizations who both understand each other and really have the same high level goal in order to be able to work together. So knowing that, then how should that change how a fintech would approach those financial institutions?
We'll talk about, the legacy mindsets or how slow banks can move. And, I think based on what we were just talking about, fintechs can start to alleviate some of these fears that financial institutions have for change or action by just doing their homework on who that financial institution is that they're about to talk to and really where their problems are in the actual customer segments and space that they're in, and really diving into their ability to communicate their brand or mission statements very quickly and clearly. If a fintech company can't do this, and really any company, but if a fintech company can't do this consistently through each and every single person that speaks for them, and I'm telling you, they're going to fail more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it happen. That's absolutely backed up by what you can see in the industry, and I think it speaks to that deeper level of understanding, right? Being able to really appreciate what the bank is doing. So, we've talked about this a little bit before, but there's kind of a language disconnect between banks and fintechs, and I think there are a variety of reasons for that. But they seem to come from different worlds in some cases, and actually communicating effectively to each other can be really difficult. And that's not a problem that's 100% on fintechs to solve. I think banks need to learn a little bit more about the language of the industry as well. But it does make it difficult when you're in kind of a presentation setting, when you're up there on stage in front of a group of people to get your message across. So what advice would you give to companies demoing at Finovate or presenting at a similar type of event on how they should speak about themselves so that they can kind of resonate with the right audience in the crowd that they're speaking to?
It's crazy because you have these people who spend a tremendous amount of time perfecting their trade, right, and building these businesses, and they're highly intelligent people, but they need to take a step back and really speak to the audience in the language that they use, right? Speak to them like you speak to bankers or how bankers speak to each other. Skip some of the tech talk, skip some of the acronyms during that initial conversations and that shorter pitch. I appreciate it as a longtime nerd hearing some of that stuff, but we can get to that stuff later when we start diving in, right, to the point we were talking about a little bit earlier. They just need to be very clear and concise with who they are, why they exist, and how they make the customer and the financial institution the champion of the experience by partnering with their companies. Every second that they're not up there telling a story about how their company can help and it is connecting with someone, they're actually just losing interest of the audience and making it really difficult to get those side conversations.
So if you're a company who's going to be presenting at Finovate, this is probably a great time to just hit rewind and go back to the beginning and listen to this whole conversation again, because Corey has given gold here. This is some really interesting pieces of information from an angle that we don't always get to hear in the fintech industry. So I'd like to end with, one final question. What you've obviously done a lot at Origin Bank to update, to embrace digital revolution. What do you think has been the piece that's made the biggest impact on you or your bank's kind of day-to-day life so far in that journey?
We have some really good partners that are working inside of our space today, and some good partners we're working to try to get out there. But, I think the thing I'm the most proud of, or the thing that is going to lead to the most success for us, really isn't about a single fintech or a piece of technology that we're using. It's about us getting back to basics and really taking more time for discussions this year than ever before about ownership and collaboration. And, look, for far too long, I think financial institutions have been choosing digital offerings like they're ordering from like this takeout menu of products, that's given to us by people who just don't even care about our business as much as we do. To fix this, what we've done is we've sat down and we've dug into setting up and finding ways to really take more control over being able to make consistent, purpose-driven change with technology that we deliver. And this has started with really transforming the way we communicate and strategize internally about how to use technology and what technology to use. That's been really important to really get that buy-in and additional push that's needed. And this has led to some really awesome conversations with some fintech companies that we trust and we look forward to growing with. I'm feeling really good about what we're doing here at Origin, but man, stay tuned because we're going to prove that community banks can do some pretty big things if we take smart risks and partner with the right people.
Yeah, I think that's really excellent that you guys have been able to do it. And creating that mentality is just a ton of work. And I know it's something that you personally have spent a lot of time and energy on, but to be in the position now where you, in many ways, you kind of have opened up this menu. You talked about being given a menu early on and saying, these are things you can pick and choose. But now that you've got the mentality, you really do have these options of different pieces that you can pick and choose. And it's something that you can embrace more intelligently, more strategically, and in a way that's really going to be helpful for you and Origin. So you heard the bell go off there while you were speaking, so that does mean we're out of time. Corey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This has been a really enlightening conversation.
Anytime, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity.
There are a lot of really good takeaways that came out of that interview, and I think it's worth listening to again, particularly if you're in the fintech space and struggling to engage with that community, which I know a lot of companies are. Some of the pieces that Corey had there are really simple, but also really effective. So I would encourage you guys to give it another listen and feel free to share it with anybody who you feel could benefit from that advice. As always, if you're interested in joining us at a future Finovate event, check out finovate.com. Our next show will be Finovate Europe in Berlin, which will be in February. Then we return to San Francisco for Finovate Spring in late May. And after that, we'll return to New York in September. We're just about to start taking applications for that show as well. So stay tuned to finovate.com, your home for all the information on our shows. And don't forget, as a podcast listener, if you'd like to join us, you're eligible for a 20% discount by using the code Finovate Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us on the Finovate podcast this week. Brought to you by the team behind Finovate and produced in association with Provoke Media. Make sure you tell your friends about the show, leave us a review on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to our show, and check out our upcoming events at finovate.com.